Oh, I was not muted. Okay, let's see. Welcome. The sun is up. I checked. Bitcoin's running. We're good to have coffee. We're good to have coffee. Let's talk about all the fun news. So much stuff. So much stuff. And we've got a released draft Bitcoin policy plan from Yay. Kanye West, who we love. We're going to get all into Kanye West's stuff a little later in the show, but first, we got to give credit where credit is due. I would have given Trump big time credit for what Biden did yesterday, which was the releasing of all marijuana. People incarcerated in federal prisons for marijuana offenses are all now pardoned, and anyone who's been convicted of that crime is pardoned, and they're going to change the schedule of marijuana from being as dangerous as heroin or wherever they had it to being way less dangerous, way less lower classification. So no more troubles. I think they didn't really get into the plan, but it looks like he'll be paving the way for a type of legalization throughout the country. So great stuff. Now, put it in context. It's not this big get out of jail card. There's very few people, in fact, in prison for federal marijuana offenses. It's in the hundreds. Still, we want all those people out of jail. So you got to give them credit. You can't, a lot of people are out there saying today, oh, Biden just did it for politics. Yeah. I mean, who in politics doesn't do things for politics? It goes without saying, right? It's sort of the most obvious thing. Oh, he did it for politics. Who in politics isn't doing stuff for politics? Just forget it. Is it good or bad? Who cares if it's good for that person in particular? If it's good for Biden, fine. But the thing about it is it's good for everyone. So who cares if it's good for Biden? I would have said the same thing in Trump's time. And so we got to give him credit. The other piece is also interesting. So there's way more than hundreds of people in prison for marijuana offenses. That's federal prison through federal policing. So you come in at the border or whatever, or FBI catches you or something like that. But most marijuana offenses those offenders and criminals are put into state prisons in the United States or county prisons. County prisons can be the craziest places going because that's where the drunkards go and other drug addicts and stuff like that. So it's definitely a part of the conversation much more than federal crimes. And so within his announcement and pardoning last night, he also encouraged the states that don't have marijuana legalization already enacted in their state to go ahead and do it, and to pardon those who didn't who were convicted in those things. So excellent. All in all, excellent news. And we should be happy, and we should realize that this is the state getting out of business that it shouldn't have been in the first place. So all in all, good news. So congratulations to Joe Biden. And it looks like, will she ever get in trouble for this? Nancy Pelosi is getting now criticized because she purchased 10 million shares. I don't know what current value of each share is $5. So, no, pardon me, it wasn't $5. It was at like $3 when she bought it. So 4 days ago, she bought 10 million shares of weed, and it's currently trading 23% up last night, trading over $5. So she made some money, it appears. It appears she made some money. But is anyone even policing that stuff? Does anyone even care? I mean, people care, but is she going to get in trouble for it? I don't think so. It looks like she's done it before. It's the same old plan. She's done it a few times. She should be fine to keep going and to remain, in her position. So I guess congratulations to Nancy Pelosi. She hit it big, even though the market is turning down on every other item. Every other commodity's had trouble, but this one, marijuana with leaked news like that, she did great. Don't people go to jail for insider trading? Isn't that normal? I guess if you get the information during a classified session, it can't count, maybe. Who knows? But they clearly let these people do it. This is all public, and it's been going on for a while. Did you know, I just found this out, you know the number one most downloaded app in China, what that is? Do you think it's TikTok, or what is it? Sometimes in America, it's like Coinbase when Bitcoin is really pumping. It's the number one most downloaded app in the country and all that stuff. The number one most downloaded app in China is called Xi Jinping Thought. It's like thoughts of the current president. Every day, some aspect of his thinking is sent out, and users then answer questions to demonstrate what they've learned. It's required of Communist Party members. Their scores on the tests are tracked. So you wake up every morning and there's like a quiz. The US, so this is from King, who is a fella on Twitter. His conclusion of all this was US woke must salivate at this. Can you imagine Nancy Pelosi or one of these people that had an app, and then you had to like answer questions based on the things they think and say? What would you do with like marble-brained, clearly has some kind of Alzheimer's president? The answers would have made sense. What kind of questions could you possibly have to answer in respect to this guy's knowledge, right? It's great stuff. But of course, it would be bent and manipulated and twisted, and it wouldn't be really what the Alzheimer's president says, or the asterisk president, as some people call him. So anyway, that's what's going on. So now, last night, Tucker Carlson, I guess it happened about 2 days ago. Tucker Carlson actually, I think on his own, I'm just guessing, went into Ye's studio in LA to see the shoes, the Yeezys, and the fashion stuff. And then it turns out yesterday an interview was released between the two of them. And I think they spoke for over an hour. I think they're going to release it in parts. About 30 or 40 minutes was released last night. I saw it this morning and took some notes for you. So I just wanted to take the notes, and then we're going to talk a bit about the Bitcoin piece right after. So first of all, he was talking about Paris Fashion Week, and he wore a White Lives Matter t-shirt there. And, you know, he got into what was going on in the room at the time, and people said they felt intimidated by him wearing that. And he had one of the greatest answers I've heard to that. You know, it's like exactly like a Trump would do. I remember when Trump was being questioned about the statues were coming down, and this would have been last September, August 2021. They were he was already kicked off of social media. He hardly ever gets sound bites in the mainstream news because of whatever, but they thought they had him here because they were tearing down Confederate soldier statues like General Lee and all that. And they said, you know, what do you think about the tearing down of these statues? So in this way, a normal mind, normal people would get caught in this trap. They would say good or bad, pro or against. And it would be this big thing, and it would just be sort of obvious. Everyone would be going into their wrestling corners, and it would just be a bit of staged fighting, right? And so remember, this was going on. The statues being taken down was happening at the same time as the very messy, botched Afghanistan pullout. People were dying and all kinds of stuff. So they asked Trump what he thought, right, about General Lee statues. And he goes, General Lee, he would have won in Afghanistan. he takes two insane ideas and just smashes them together and generates the only answer possible in that situation. You know, this was it was going to be a hit job, basically. What do you think about General Lee? And then he was going to give an answer. We shouldn't take down historical statues. The same old thing. Like I said, wrestling. They had the counterpunch ready for that. So instead of him throwing what everyone thought would be the obvious response, he out of nowhere plucked this amazing answer, which forced you to think about it. Even if you were against General Lee and all that, you had to say to yourself, well, yeah, maybe General Lee would have won in Afghanistan. Even if you were against all of it, you would have thought General Lee could have won in Afghanistan. It's like a magic trick. So Ye in Paris, one of these people went up to him and said, I'm very uncomfortable with your t-shirt. And his answer, he didn't argue about Black Lives Matter or White Lives Matter. He says, your boots are ugly. He turned it all into fashion. How clever is that? That's the kind of stuff we need. That's outside of the box thinking, and it shows you just how smart this guy is. So he keeps going on. He talks about how that was just one of those examples of people trying to push him and say things, and how influencers worked. And one thing he said when he first came out as pro-Trump, right away when Trump announced, he said everyone tried to persuade him against it. They gave him all these reasons. They said, well, you can't do it. It was the same sort of list persuasion he mentions when he wore the White Lives Matter t-shirt. It was no one good reason, but here's like a bunch of little reasons that you're going to get killed, you're going to get greenlit, they called it. Greenlit. Greenlit means you can get, whacked. You're going to get greenlit, they said. And he said, well, I don't care. In the end, he said his best response that he got was from his father. He talked a lot about his father and his mother and all that in the interview. And the best reaction he got to the White Lives Matter shirt was from his dad. And his dad said, it's just a black man saying the obvious. And it's enough to cause that much of an uproar. So he said, it's just a black man saying the obvious. So Ye went with that and said, that's really the brilliant thing. And in the end, what he tied it all back to was something we've been talking about a bit on this show about following energy and the alchemist way, right? That sometimes alchemy is nothing to do with what we mentioned earlier about turning metal into gold. That was kind of a fake news diversion. It's truly about following the energy inside of your blood, inside of your gut. And he talked about that, why he does these things. And he says, I just follow the energy. It's a gut instinct. And he said something, I want to do what's brilliant. And the way he used the word brilliant here, to me, says brilliant as in it shines, as in it is almost angelic, right? I don't think he said brilliant as in it's really clever. I think things that shine like a diamond or whatever, right? Brilliant. And I thought that was great. So he, continued on this path of talking about how influencers mold his ex-wife and how they force her to say things. He mentioned that the Clintons had come close to her, partly to persuade him to not say things that they didn't like. He didn't know that until a little while after it was already going on for quite a while. And he said something really interesting as well about how that whole world was all codified in white people language, effectively credentialism, and said, well, one thing we have to worry about with all of this stuff when it comes to all these people around you, all these people pushing you, especially the Black community, he said, is that it's all done in legal language, and you get a lot of artists signing contracts they don't even understand. And as someone who graduated from law school, I've always thought that law was a million times more complicated than it needs to be. When you go and even look at, SEC stuff, we've talked about it a bit on the show, where SEC is sort of seen, securities lawyers are kind of seen as the brain surgeons in law. I always argued that's only because the field was unnecessarily complicated. It had nothing to do with their actual skills. It had everything to do with what I mentioned on the show yesterday, and why American courts are starting to say that the SEC can't have an enforcement and adjudication wing. It's because you can't have there's no separation of powers. You can't have a bureaucracy also running a judiciary. They're too intertwined. And the logic being that if civil courts can't understand the law, then the law is too specific and too complicated for anyone to understand, which is what we have. In the SEC today, it's become so complicated because they have their own specialized court. It's like building a bespoke car, right? A general mechanic couldn't handle just a car that someone made on their own that was like an F1 type vehicle that was engineered and manipulated to be that much more bespoke, but to be faster and better and all those things. So the logic, you understand why they're making bespoke laws for securities, because they're trying to stop things and control things and manage things the same way an engineer would approach an engine. And they ended up creating something that no general mechanic can even have a look at. No general lawyer can handle securities law. It's way too complicated. There's too many exceptions, too many concepts that are foreign, too many rules, and it's very hard to follow. It's just as hard to follow the history of the laws. It's the way I used to describe it. It would be like having to explain a phone book to someone that no longer has alphabetical order. It's like they even took out the interface of the alphabet in order to get around it. It's a remarkable thing and very, very stupid. So he comes in and says, we have all these people signing contracts that they don't understand. The language makes no sense. So why do you think all these artists and all really some of the most talented Black people in America can't get ahead, why they're constantly getting, why they're all often bankrupt just a few years after being stars. Athletes being the same, right? They don't always understand the royalty deals because they're written in a language that not even a lawyer like myself, not really a lawyer, but someone who's trained in the law and spent a bit of time working as a lawyer, we can't even understand this stuff. It's too specialized. It's the mechanic not being able to repair the car situation again. So amazing stuff. But then he does something even more amazing. He tied it in, and that's how we're going to get to the policy plan. He tied all these influencers around his wife into the influencers that were around Trump and started talking about VCs. He went for dinner with Josh and Jared Kushner. So Jared Kushner is married to Ivanka Trump, and Ivanka obviously being Donald's daughter. And he says he's a big fan of Ivanka, loves her, thinks she's great. And when he was speaking with Jared and Josh at dinner, he ended up finding out that Josh owned 10% of Skims. I guess Skims was a clothing line that he helped develop for Kim in order to sell product. And he said he put a lot of attention into making Kim Kardashian the kind of person who everyone would, a fashion icon that other people would want to copy her style and her clothes and things like that. So, he sort of foresaw that she could be this fashion icon and spent a lot of time making it happen. And when he found out that Josh Kushner at this dinner owned 10% of the company, he went back and said, "What? I didn't even know that." And he goes, "Wait a minute. I only own 5% of the company." And it really bothered him. It bothered him. Understandably why it bothered him. It didn't bother him that in particular Josh owned 10% of the company, it sounds like. He said it's, probably inherited the money, nothing against him. He was against the system that didn't even allow him to understand why you would sell a percentage to a VC, how they even got in the game, where are these people coming from? He goes, it's an internet business. We don't need VCs. We were already profitable. We didn't need an injection of cash in order to make the business run. We were good to go. Who's out there selling that stuff? And he realized he had a huge blind spot and didn't know what was going on. And he found that to be another one of these examples of a system that is just not built to do what it should do. It's not actually built to make wealth and all that. It's built so that other people can come and have a bite at your table, right? It's so that other people can come and eat off of your table. And I'm putting those words out there. That's not what he said, but that's how I'm describing it. So, other people eating your meal. So it brings me to the board. So I have long been a Kanye West 2024 supporter. I will be a Kanye West 2024 supporter, a Kanye West 2028 supporter. The only argument that I can come up with why he shouldn't be the president is because he might be too good for it, right? He might have a bigger role to play in spiritual healing of America or something along those lines. But as it is, presidential role, while less than he's capable of, I think less than he's capable of, actually is a good title. And he said this before about why he even loved Donald Trump, and it was a really interesting story, and I'll share it. He said when he saw Obama as president, it didn't really click for him that he could be president because he came from this credentialist world. Of course, Obama was Harvard graduated, one of the most credentialed people you'll come across, right? Really great background, really great education. Definitely, if we're just talking about raw horsepower, one of the smartest presidents we've ever had in the United States. And so Ye actually didn't think, the skin color didn't make a difference to him. When he saw Donald Trump, the reality TV star, he said, that's what made me think I could be president. Right? The skin color had nothing to do with it. He never had a feeling, he liked Obama, but Obama never inspired him to be the president. He was inspired to be the president when he saw Trump, because Trump had this weird skill set and was very different than anyone else. So that in itself convinced him. So, and you know how he got into Bitcoin? This is another pretty interesting story. Kanye West got into Bitcoin because he heard an announcement that Harriet, just think about how his mind works when you hear the story. We all have stories about how he came into Bitcoin, right? We all have stories. Some of them fall into a very familiar story. I was doing this, working in a bank, or I was, whatever. In my case, I was studying money laundering and terrorism financing regimes and saw how terrible FATF was and figured out Bitcoin from that way. Common. My case is very common. Kanye West found out because he saw an announcement that Harriet Tubman was going to be on an American dollar bill, the $5 or $10, I don't remember which bill. And if you don't know who Harriet Tubman was, she's the woman who ran the Underground Railroad. She helped people come right where I am here. They would run them up through Vermont and from the south to be free in Canada. Canada weirdly siding with the Confederate Army during the Civil War because they were just trying to fuck with the United States. Pardon me for swearing. They were just trying to mess with the United States. Any way they could was good. Taking slaves in, good. Supporting the South, good. It was, there was no such thing as Canada at the time, by the way. It was all just a British colony, and of course Britain wanted to dominate textiles, and so there was no reason for them to want to support a unified America going forward. So we're definitely involved in some shenanigans, and so Harriet Tubman was a hero of that, and a lot of us as children here in North America read The Underground Railroad as a book when we were kids. And it was part of normal curriculum when I was young anyway, to learn about Harriet Tubman. We would spend quite a bit of time on it. So Harriet Tubman going to be on the bill. I think she is. I haven't seen the money, but I believe she's on some bill. And his instinct was, wait a minute, there's something wrong with the money if they're putting more dead people on it. Why can't we have alive money? So he went on a personal search and found Bitcoin. And this is years ago. This is like 2014 or something like that. This is during Obama's presidency. And learned about Bitcoin at that time and said, well, Bitcoin's the future because they're not putting dead people on the money. What an amazing entry point into Bitcoin. Just totally unique and totally different story. But here's what we got. So I have said that he can be president, and I've often been, I almost had a vision of myself helping, because I've helped in political campaigns. I worked in the Canadian politics for years. That's sort of what I did in my early Bitcoin time. I got a Bitcoin study running in the Senate Banking Committee in Canada. So I understand the political sphere quite well. And, I have this sort of idea that I could probably help Ye as an economic advisor. So I've drafted my economic policy for him. And it's 5 points, shouldn't be too complicated. In the spirit of Elon Musk just putting a plan down on paper for Ukraine, I've put a plan down on paper for Kanye and his presidential election, and I think it works. So this is Ye's 5-point 2024 Bitcoin, and I think we can win. I think we can win with it. So the first one that I have, and I've been saying this for a long time, I say this out loud as often as I can to manifest it. As someone who produces Bitcoin events, including Bitcoin 2023, one of my ideas in an event leading up to the 2024 US election is to actually go to Jekyll Island, where the US dollar was created. If you didn't know the whole story about that, you should read the book, The Creature of Jekyll Island. It's all about how the bank trust was formed at a time when trusts were getting destroyed across America, 1910, 1911, 1912. Teddy Roosevelt was the trust buster and was busting all the trusts. And trusts were really just monopolies, groups of companies that came together to create monopolies. That's where a lot of anti-competition laws came from, the anti-monopoly laws and all that stuff. So Teddy Roosevelt, was definitely against all these trusts. What was being formed at the time could have been called a bank trust. So they had to change the name because the word trust was so heavily involved in the media, trust busting and all that kind of stuff. So they just called it the Federal Reserve, neither federal, or reserve, as we all know, right? There's nothing, the Federal Reserve is neither federal and it's not a reserve. It's neither of those two things. So at the time, the bank trust, which was literally just a collusion between banks to create a financial system, 1912, went to this Jekyll Island. Now, there's all kinds of occult history about the island, which we're not going to get into here today. Please go read Creature from Jekyll Island, and you'll learn much more about the occult history of the island. And a lot of people believe the occult history of the island and the birthed creature of it, the creature from Jekyll Island, is basically in the spirit of the money, right? It's infused into the psychology of the US dollar. Some people say. But anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Jekyll Island and we're going to do a show, a Bitcoin show, and we're going to sanctify the island, and we're going to get the terrible stuff, the terrible vibes that were left over from that period, and we're going to bring Bitcoin there, and we're going to basically do an event, and Kanye is going to be our headliner. So the first part of his Bitcoin policy is to go to Jekyll Island to raise awareness, do an event, and get people talking about the history of the US dollar and the purification qualities that Bitcoin could perhaps bring. The next one, a HODL tax on incentives. HODL tax incentive, sorry, not a HODL tax, erase that. A tax incentive for HODLing. And what that means is he complained about those VCs, if you remember. He complained about the VCs and said, well, how do we live in a system where nobody knows about what they're, I didn't even know about my own company. The person sitting at dinner with me who did nothing for the company that I built owns more of it than I own, right? How do we get in this position? So our argument in Bitcoin remains that we need to lower the IQ for participation in the financial system, not increase the literacy so people can participate in credit default swaps, right? That's what the mainstream approach is going to be to personal finance, right? That's what the academic approach is to personal finance. Why are these people so stupid? How come they can't learn all this complicated stuff? We need to give them more information, more tools, more resources to learn more complicated things. No one's ever asking is, why do we have to all be Series 7 license holders with 130 IQs that are trying to beat the bank trends and beat the policy trends? It's too much, right? It's too much. To incentivize that much financialization, of course, is not something Bitcoiners want. So what this plan does is just incentivizes saving. And the hodling, I think, can be for anything, right? I don't think it has to be necessarily for Bitcoin. I think people will choose to save Bitcoin. But basically, there's already a tax incentive to not sell securities and to hold securities for a certain amount of time. This would be a similar thing for savings investments. For savings tools, savings technology. So if you have savings technology, you should incentivize its use, which is what this would be. So I don't know the correct amount of years, but basically holding an asset for a certain amount of time will exempt you from taxes, which is probably the best plan out there for saving money and wealth creation. So instead of incentivizing more VCs and saying everyone has to get smarter and more financially literate, what we're going to say is financial literacy is much simpler than anyone has told you, and that a little bit of incentive to save will probably solve the problem. So that's what we're going to do. The next one, the canned royalty contracts. Canned royalty contracts. So I put a Campbell's soup can here. So what that means is, like I said about law, it's way overly complicated compared to what it needs to be. It's nowhere near as accessible and easy as it should be. In fact, the industry is mostly designed to exclude people. People often call law a language. It sure is. It's another language. That's exactly what it is. And if you don't learn how to speak it, beat it. Pay a lawyer to translate some garbage words for you and write. I did this a little while ago for a company. I said, well, don't hire a lawyer for this because it's gonna cost you a fortune. And I'm telling you right now what you need to do, right? I know enough of this stuff that go this way, and you're gonna be fine. And what did they do? They hired a lawyer. It cost them $50,000. They wrote a 30-page paper, 30-page legal paper, right? The CEO of the company read it all. And I said, well, what'd you think? He goes, you were right. It's the same as, because I had written him a half paragraph of everything you needed to know. It was a half paragraph. I fit everything on not even one page, not even a half page, a paragraph, right? A paragraph, everything. It was the same document. I did it for free before an email, right? Like before I had to send him an email and I knew he needed some information. I said, this is all you need to know, go. And he ended up paying $50,000 for a 30-page paper, which said the exact same thing I said, exact. So in the same way that these influencers, and the way Ye described it in the Tucker interview, was they're paid to tell you what to be afraid of. They're paid to tell you what to be afraid of, not what to do positively. They're paid to tell you what to fear. And I saw that as a disease with a lot of the people that I went to law school with. they all became so risk averse and fear driven. You know, the amount of advice I got, for example, when I quit all of that world and went into Bitcoin, 10 years ago, they thought I was nuts. They couldn't imagine the risks involved and all that. And I just said, guys, like, people pay you to worry about things. Don't worry about this. Like, I'm not paying you to worry about this. And of course, I was, until now, right. So there you go. So what I want to do here is create canned royalty contracts where you can have artists and performers, anyone who has some royalty generating scheme, to actually have a canned contract where those contracts are the same for everyone. Everyone uses the same thing. It's really the Campbell's soup type attitude. So in the same way that, like, the Great Depression caused food to become mass-produced, commoditized, and then the World War II war machine was able to kick food production into that mass scale, and we had the Campbell soups and the Andy Warhols that recognized the historical shift and significance of Campbell soup and all that kind of stuff. We can actually do the same now with legal agreements, right? It's not just about what we see. So that's big change, big news. And what do you mean by a canned contract? Well, in my own Bitcoin story, I've created a way, for example, to sell ownership of future revenue derived from the book. So if you bought like 1% if you bought my book, you would get a certain amount of shares in the future. And what you do then is just pile all the Bitcoin that you sell your book for dollars or whatever, but then you pile it all into one big pile of Bitcoin. And a person, say they own 1% of your future sales, they can draw from that 1% of Bitcoin. Not forever. It's like a one-time deal. So they would have to wait and then draw it out, trade their ownership for the actual revenue the book has generated in Bitcoin. So, in theory, you could start having people listening to albums and earning Bitcoin, being the first at a concert, earning Bitcoin, where, we want to get rid of, that meek hipster attitude about liking music or liking something first, or I liked it before anyone. And, the problem with that is it's because it's the only way to flex your taste and aesthetic knowledge. You're basically denying fandom early because you were there early, right? That is basically the only weapon. What we can create with this is people saying, "Oh, wow, you know how much Bitcoin that guy has? They were at the first concert of XYZ. They were at the first Ye concert where, they listened to the first album that Ye released that had Bitcoin royalty payments," right? You could start imagining a world like that. So totally possible. We can get there, and we need to put canned contracts that pay out in Bitcoin for artists and talent and all the rest. The next one here that I have is nuclear energy policies, nuclear energy finance. So part of the economic Bitcoin plan is to get rid of any hindrances we have to small modular nuclear. And we can see examples right away. There's now a 40-foot truck bed that can handle a nuclear reactor put in a shipping container. So you can put a shipping container and bring a nuclear reactor anywhere in the world, anywhere. And imagine what that can provide as far as colonization and terraformation of the North. I've often argued that we were able to get to the oil and gas because of air conditioning, because we can actually go and live in Texas and Saudi Arabia and all these places. Now, with nuclear energy and with the transportability of one of these reactors, you can actually start colonizing the North Pole. You can actually start going further north, because it's the same way that air conditioning will make it pleasant to live in the South. What we can do with the amount of energy we have in the North is heat everything. You can actually build huge domes. That's what my Bitcoin story is all about, these huge domes that we've engineered in the North where people live and do stuff and, have all kinds of business affairs. So there you go. And the reason we're doing, here's a story just from yesterday. Janet Yellen, we love her. She's the best, huh? Isn't she amazing? Now, we love her because her face and the way she holds herself, it's so funny and awkward that it's good for Bitcoin. Like her being the face, you know how good it is that the Buy Bitcoin guy had her face in the foreground with her, This is great. She's perfect. Central casting couldn't have come up with a better dolt for Bitcoin. Honestly, there's no one out there better than Janet Yellen. We should hope she gets some other job as this administration continues, because she's amazing. And so she said yesterday that as Americans grapple with the worst inflation crisis in a century, Secretary Yellen announced that U.S. taxpayers will be boosting international climate financing to over $11 billion a year. $11 billion a year. Now, Konstantin Kisin, who we talk about a lot on this show, wrote this, not in response, but in the same context. He says, when the history of this period is written, we will probably view the fact that we deliberately made ourselves poor, insecure, and dependent on evil regimes for our energy as a willful surrender to the doomsday cult of the climate emergency trademark, and were punished accordingly. I think Konstantin Kisin is someone you should listen to on this subject. So what we're going to do is we're going to get nuclear reactor regulations in place so that we can mass produce these. And we're not going to put anything, Bitcoin doesn't need an advantage here, doesn't need a help. It's part of a Bitcoin policy plan, because my idea, just like in royalties, Bitcoin will fill the vacuum for this financing once it's possible to build a reactor, right? That'll be that'll be the reaction. The last one in our 5-point plan, and this is my favorite one. It's absolutely my favorite one. This is, if you're not from America, that is a U.S. interstate sign. So whenever you're driving around the highway network in America, you'll see one of these signs. There'll be a number on it, and it'll tell you you're going north or south or whatever, right? That's how you get around on the highway system. Not the local roads and all that, but when you're on the highway system, that's what the signs all look like. So World War II ended, and America built a civil engineering project, the Eisenhower Highway Network. It all came as sort of a great public works project after the Second World War to get everyone to work, but it was still built on good ship World War II, right? It was like federally planned and engineers and budgeting, and that's why it's called the Eisenhower Network. So my idea is decentralized. It's still a highway network. But it comes from having lived in New York City during the pandemic, and something that I saw and that I can't unsee. So the heroes of the pandemic, unequivocal heroes of the pandemic, are the delivery people. The nurses, for sure, we did all the clapping in New York, but they're, the whole healthcare industry had good and bad. So it's hard to say unequivocal heroes, right? Anyone who was out there, I'm telling you, they're a hero in the hospitals, for sure. That's not what I'm saying. But there was a lot of people telling you what to do, a lot of nagging, a lot of you're not welcome here, and all that kind of stuff. So people's mistrust of nurses and doctors are high. They probably shouldn't be. I don't think the nurses and doctors should have been in a position where they had to figure out the science on their own. Like, they shouldn't be doing their own research either, right? So I still will blame the news and all that stuff, but as far as the unequivocal heroes go, just heroes, doctors, nurses, definitely heroes. Don't want to take anything away from them. But the unequivocal heroes are the delivery people, right? Because everyone was getting stuff delivered. And in New York City in 2020, they shut down about 1/3 of public infrastructure to give people space to walk around. And so 1/3 of streets, 1/3 of streets. So here's the idea. Not bike lanes, not side of the street stuff. I'm saying the same 1/3 of New York City streets and a bridge, Williamsburg or Brooklyn or one of those bridges. The whole thing, no cars. 1/3 of streets, one bridge, all no cars. Bike highways. And bike highways where even, sometimes the subways have a raised platform and the road is underneath. You can start doing like they do in Japan and pay for infrastructure below that to keep the road, clean and against the elements. But here's the thing. All these Uber delivery drivers, all these, commuters, basically it turns into a Black Lives Matter thing. New York City's infrastructure is broken. You can't send them back on the subways. Too crazy. The highways are awful. We can't fit more cars in New York City. That's not going to happen. What's the answer? The answer, I think, is to be like Shanghai. If you go to Shanghai today, there is no separation of the electric bikes and trikes and golf carts from the automobiles. They're all on the same roads. I'm saying we would put a separation because it's too dangerous. So you separate them, and then you have about 1/3 of the city running through these e-bikes and everything. And in the end, I think that what we are going to get is a national highway system. So from New York City to everywhere, a highway system, so that basically what America turns into is the best vacation spot in the world. So people just come, buy a, what do they cost? $2,000, $3,000 bike, and visit all the national parks. Not on the side of the road, on your own infrastructure. It's going to be its own highway. And here's the thing, because it's for bikes, you don't need centralized engineers. Basically, anyone can build this. Anyone can say, I want a track coming to my town, and here's what we're going to do. Here's the Bitcoin piece to it. We can actually prove. So Bitcoin talks about a political philosophy very often. Bitcoiners talk about a political philosophy very often, but there's almost zero examples of it being tried, tested, and used in the real world, which is voluntarism, right? Voluntarism. How do we get voluntarism to work? Well, my idea here would be to have voluntary tip posts basically throughout the whole network where people can give sats to access the network, right? There's however much you want. You can give a lot, you can give a little, right? But there's all kinds of places to give Bitcoin to this network, right? So the network then has Bitcoin. It can actually collateralize that Bitcoin and start drawing loans off of it for infrastructure and pay it out in dollars. And they can pay out construction of track to that town, to that town, to this town. And as they get more money from people using it, they have more money to pay out for people to build stuff. Then you can start saying, well, if you want to sell something on the track, you want to be a street vendor for hot dogs, for example, great. Just leave us a tip at the end in Bitcoin every time. So you have the sats and the Bitcoin collateralized, and you can actually start investing it into other projects and expanding the network so that you can actually get more tips. The point of all of this in the end is the travel's fun, the e-bikes are the future, the e-golf carts are the future, really stylish stuff. Really inexpensive, good for travel, slows the pace down of America, makes road maintenance much cheaper because they can be, there's no standard material you have to make it out of, right? You're not going 100 miles an hour, right? You're going really slow in a light vehicle. And so cataclysmic accidents are sort of out the door. They're not possible, right? You can get maybe like the worst thing that can happen is a bike kind of breaks and you get a bit stabbed. That would be the worst. I can't imagine anything worse. Maybe a bit of a head injury, but it's not dangerous compared to cars. So in the end, what we would want to induce is voluntarism being tested on a massive scale, and with the benefits being, Bitcoiners can have a travel network. So that's it. That's my yay 5-point plan. Let me see the chat. I have a call coming up. Okay, let me see. Whoa, a lot of chats. What's up, Justin? Pelosi is the biggest signal if you're a trader. Yeah, you gotta follow Pelosi. She's one of the great traders of all time now, isn't she? Justin says Pelosi won't get in any trouble because she's stonewalling any legislation from insider trading. Yeah. Huru says, I know that I'm not even an American and how influenced. Well, I mean, good for her. Those are the rules, right? I think it's absurd, but those are the rules. That's what happens when we allow such low IQ people to take over. They'll just say, oh, anyone else can do it, right? Shouldn't these people sort of see themselves already as special? Like, they don't, but or they do. Justin says, can those SMR semi-trucks make it into the Rashad structure? Asking for a friend. Yeah. So my goal is to, I'm not sure I've shared it with everyone. I actually want to rebuild Atlantis in the Rashad structure and terraform it using Bitcoin Citadel mindframe, where we would put the small modular reactor in the middle of the Rashad structure in Mauritania. Bitcoiners would live there. And do you know how to terraform stuff? It's pretty easy. It's cow poo. Right? Cow poo will turn desert into farmable land. So basically, Bitcoiners bring their food source and their energy source. And I think within no time, you'd have a real citadel going. And here's the thing, the Rashad structure, Mauritania, Western Sahara, one of only 2 parts of the world that's no one has dibs on it. No, we don't have to ask anyone. We can do it today. You don't have to ask anyone. If you go, they got to bring guns. It's pirates and stuff, but you got to take care of yourself. But, we don't need to ask permission, which is the great news, I got Huru. Oh, I've always wondered what that meant. I missed what that was in reference to. But anyway, guys, I got to head to my call. I have a weird obligation on Friday mornings for a call at 8:45. All right. Ciao, team. Well, I'll probably see you tomorrow. Canadian Thanksgiving, but we'll see.